New research finds childhood obesity rates are getting worse. The study in JAMA Pediatrics found 17% of U.S. children were obese in 2012. Researchers say what's particularly troubling is the jump in children who are extremely obese. That's having a body mass index at least 120% higher than normal. The findings contradict a recent report that showed a decline in childhood obesity rates. Researchers say that study only focused on the last decade and didn't give an accurate look at the big picture. A new study suggests gastric banding surgery can help overweight patients control their diabetes.
Americans are getting heavier. According to the World Health Organization, global obesity rates have doubled since 1980. The WHO says 1.4 billion people were overweight across the globe in 2008. One Amherst resident blames the high cost of eating healthy for obesity still being on the rise.
Like all the chips were on sale and candy's on sale, but like none of the other healthy things are in like the refrigerators are on sale. Like everything's very expensive. So it's a big problem, I feel like.
The Frontiers in Psychology group says sugar and salt are actually addictive, feeding the growing obesity epidemic.
The World Health Organization says the number of obese children and teens is now 10 times higher than it was 40 years ago due to poor nutrition and lack of exercise. The problem is more than just physical.
Social, psychological problems for the children themselves, more stigmatism, more bullying.
An online study in the journal Lancet found that obese children tend to be overweight as adults.
It's also more likely to lead to earlier onset of conditions like heart disease, cancer, and diabetes.
Experts analyze data from 2,400 different studies that track the height and weight of 32 million children 5 to 19 years old. The research shows an estimated 74 million boys and 50 million girls are obese worldwide.
In today's Health Smart, the CDC has released statistics that show people in more states are larger than ever. Here's how obesity rates looked in 2012. They ranged from low to moderate, with no states having an obesity rate above 35%. Now fast forward 10 years and the rates skyrocket above 35%. It's worse in Oklahoma, Louisiana, and West Virginia, where more than 40% of adults are considered obese. California has remained consistent in the 25 to 30% range. No state had a rate below 25% in the latest calculations. Obesity is linked to a variety of health issues, including heart disease, diabetes, high blood pressure, and also kidney disease.
And now we're continuing to talk about this, the barriers to forming a better system. So we want to form a better system. We recognize there's problems. We recognize we have to change the current system. What can we do? Well, there is a failure to launch better health systems due to obedience and limiting system knowledge, and a disbelief and trust issue in pushing the norm beyond what science is up to date on or alleged studies.
Yes, I would add that there's a question here around censorship and difficult access to information, and being that knowledge is so important for all parties, for patients and for providers and any interested party. And so the issue I've seen and been very concerned about is the limiting or discrediting of valid information.
Yes. Well, it would help for us to understand what it means to really make a diagnosis. We can actually break down the word from Greek proposition dia, which means through or by way of, and the Greek noun gnosis, which means knowledge. So by way or through way of knowledge. Can we get to the root cause by asking why? Because if knowledge is limited, we may not be able to make a correct diagnosis. Having more knowledge may also mean that more choices are present in our treatment. So patients can also educate themselves, and we have to ask ourselves, are we promoting this? Are we making a holistic diagnosis? Are we making a diagnosis based on the amount of knowledge, the most amount of knowledge that we can give to our patient, our client?
If I could just quickly add on this, as a 20-year veteran in the system, is I do hear a lot of providers discourage me from gaining my own self-knowledge. They'll say this isn't WebMD. And, now actually we all have access to one of the most powerful tools, which is AI, for almost anything. And I think that I'm just, as much as I understand that the doctors don't want us doing things that are going to harm our progression with our healing, I think also we need to all level up in realizing that a lot of patients we don't need to infantilize the patients, let's just say. Let's encourage them to empower themselves to find the information and to present it to the team and to have a true collaborative participatory model of care.
Yeah, very well said, Steph. And I think when we talk about diagnoses, we're used to the typical diagnoses that we get from the doctor's office or from a therapist, when we provide a mental health diagnosis. But I want to just add that these diagnoses are really not answering the question why. They are much more likely to be descriptions of symptoms, and that this deeper excavation of the root causes of illness is often not found in typical treatment. And I also have experienced a doctor saying, don't educate yourself on that. Or for example, when my kids were little, if they had a little ear pain, I would do garlic in oil. And, the pediatrician told me, don't do that, and, because what if there's a hole in their eardrum, so there's a lot of discouragement. And I find it to be disrespectful to my intelligence, disrespectful to my ability to think and access solutions to problems. And, it leads to this hierarchy of the provider somehow being at a different plane or platform than an individual seeking help, which is a imbalanced relationship. And again, is going to affect the trust and the communication and the ability to listen and understand each other, and create more of a barrier into this very important process.
Yeah, Leslie, I'm sure, if you felt like that, there's probably many others who feel the same way in varying degrees. So it's something to pay attention to. We have to ask ourselves, well, what is really keeping us limited? What's preventing us from attaining more knowledge to make that diagnosis we speak of? Well, it can be fear, groupthink, cultural comforts, cultural norms, or even reductionist or authoritarian worldviews. And so we may have fear due to legal repercussions, cognitive dissonance, groupthink. Well, you can refer to the Asch conformity experiments. We'll talk about that actually later. Cultural comforts like paychecks, insurance, our persona. Cultural norms such as trusting the current science and the divide between those considered scientific and those considered spewing information or pseudoscience for holistic points of view. And then an authoritarian worldview with growing expertise. It's like, I know it, you don't know what you're talking about. It's less personalized, where they're listening perhaps intuitively to the patient or client.
I would like to just quickly add, there is nuance here, sadly, and that we need to discuss is that there are people from specific times, places, generations who aren't really used to being self-informed, and they may need a little bit more of that proxy parent relationship to guide them through something, right? But we can't use that attitude as the overarching way that we speak to any patient. Patients now have access to much more information, and also we've had to learn to start to educate ourselves more. So I believe that every provider really needs to fully assess what he feels, in all honesty, his patient can handle and what they can't, and to constantly try to promote the empowerment of knowledge and self-sovereignty as much as possible with any patient that they have, instead of just assuming that control authoritarian role.
Yes. And I also want to make it clear that these are a lot of our statistical prefaces. So we're sharing a lot of our thoughts, our observations, our experiences, and then we're going to back it up by a lot of research later on, where we share a lot of the modalities and people who have researched upon what is keeping us limited. How do we escape that limitation? And so What is a limited diagnosis? Well, why is this happening? MDs are not typically taught about the connection between stress, anxiety, and the gut. This may be one case, right? They are not taught about the importance of gut health on our mental and emotional functioning. Illnesses such as IBS, Crohn's, leaky gut, etc., are related to our mental and emotional state of ease or dis-ease. We may be treating the symptoms rather than the root cause. The current system may not incentivize enough time or resources in order to do this.
And I'd like to add this catch-22 that providers are in because of the typical, I think, mentality of many patients that they really are looking to the providers for the answer. They're really putting the weight on this doctor solving their problem. And there's a kind of fallacy in this appeal to authority or this appeal to the expert to have the answer, as opposed to recognizing, that it's a teamwork, really. It is a mutual responsibility to finding the solutions and diagnosing the problem. And so we need to, again, come back to this thought of, all of us are human. And we are all, if we can join and meet each other at this level of our humanness, then we can really have a more effective conversation to get to the root of things and develop a treatment plan that is going to be most satisfactory.
That's an empowered model of care, which I hope that we can start to move to. What the physician asking, what can I do to empower my patient as much as possible? When we don't take that time to empower each other, then it's almost as though there's a victim and a savior dynamic. And that's an energy transference that we will get into much later of who's getting the energy in this relationship of savior and victim.
And I just want to add this observation around two companies in the state of California who, just based on their name, okay, if you look at the name Kaiser, the biggest health insurance HMO in California, Kaiser means emperor. It has a basis in someone with great authority and power. So it's kind of a setup for this mentality. I'm part of another a therapist funnel that used to be called Path, that they changed their name or were taken over and now are called Rula. Sounds a lot like ruler. And some of the actions and ways that they try to control the process are evident. So this is recognizable even in these subtle things like the names.
Yeah, an interesting observation for sure. And so the provider-patient relationship is something that you guys have mentioned a couple of times, and I think it's important to expand on this. A disconnection can form due to the system, the healthcare system, the administrations, and there could be egos and institutional competition. Many of the doctors who stepped down or had their licenses revoked have spoke about this issue. Complication may reduce quality of treatment. Focus on the bottom line of management can create the illusion of scarcity for resources, creating a scarcity mindset. This trickles down. And then profit or financial motive is in conflict with patient or provider care. And there can be a separation between provider and patient, provider and provider. All these work together. As Leslie mentions, there's a third system as well. The healthcare system, the administrations, the insurance that gets in the way of this as well, which Stephanie says is like this triad.
And the question I ask is, what is the impact on the patient-provider relationship and the trust between those two parties when one party deems themselves an authority or the third party acts as the authority that limits or controls the process of healthcare?
Stephanie, if you can expand on the organ transplants, you have a story to share with us that I think would be rather telling for the current state of our world.
My personal experience revolves around a long time observation within the organ transplant process within healthcare. Within healthcare, there's different sects of healthcare. We focus on different compartments, different parts. Organ transplants could be heart, liver, kidney, multiple organ systems are related to transplant. But the issue is that the patient, for whatever reason, ends up in organ failure, whether it be acute or from some sort of chronic or genetic condition. And then the issue is, are they able to get an organ transplant? And the hope is that they can, if they're qualified, if they're healthy enough to receive it. But then the other issue is, does this come from a deceased donor, or does this come from somebody that I know who is gracious enough to give me an organ? And being amongst this process, when you're in this system, it is glorified. And obviously, this is where nuance comes in to play here, is that if you're lucky enough to get an organ transplant and you survive, that is a wonderful opportunity for an extension of life. In fact, the promise from most of the healthcare team is you're lucky and you finally got your life back. There's an assumption that because a new organ is placed into your body, that all of your problems or a lot of your health problems are gone. There's very little nuance with any upstream dealings with, why did this illness actually even happen to me? Am I going to be in, what's going to happen to me afterwards? There's a promise that I'm going to give you a solution and you're going to be recovered and you can go get your life back. From my experience is that there's a high and a low, and there's a lot of actual highs and lows within the process of medical treatment. And I've discovered that there's definitely a high when you're able to get your organ transplant, and most people afterwards hit a low when they come to realize that they weren't really maybe being treated for more root cause issues, a lot of mental health issues, a lot of anxiety and depression issues, very low return to work cases with people that have organ transplantation, unless they've had a good job that they can return to prior to their transplantation. The promise isn't actually in alignment with the actual results of this process. And then also, you don't hear anybody typically ever mention some of the darker, more shadowy aspects of the world of organ harvesting. And it's not something that we really want to talk about, but when you talk about organ transplantation, it is a part of the story, and it's an important part of the story. And I feel as though my experience has been, a lot of patients have a lot of mental and emotional issues that they could truly benefit if they had some better frameworks and some better help to help them deal with it. I've heard psychologists tell transplant patients openly, oh, you can expect to be on antidepressants the rest of your life, or anti-anxiety medication for the rest of your life. The majority of the patients are. And in fact, I am myself as a psychologist. This was an actual conversation that I heard. So we're normalizing the stress, and we're not really working on getting beyond the stress. And that's something within the system that, again, I think we are not giving our patients enough credit for a transformational process that can happen if they're given the proper help. And it's just a very sad state of affairs if you look at the studies realistically of people a couple years after transplantation. Sometimes the organ fails, but most of the time there's just high percentages of mental health, emotional health issues. They don't return to work, and then they're caught back up in that survival loop once again where they started, of trying to get their basic needs met. So there's this glorification, but without the holistic process, people end up often back where they started, and that profits nobody but the system.
Wow. Yeah, and Leslie, you had a story to share about firearm access, if you can expand on that.
Yes, I'd be glad to. So this example illustrates one of the barriers to people reaching out for help for mental health. You know, when people may be experiencing depression, or even, have thoughts of self-harm or suicide. And this came from a group conversation with an individual who was saying that she didn't feel comfortable talking to anyone about her depression because she had the belief that if she did so and a doctor or a therapist found out, that they could take away her legal access to her firearms. And so I live in a part of California where that's really an important topic for many people who live here, a very rural area. And what I came to realize is that she had an incorrect understanding of what the system even can use to justify taking away firearms. And it led, but even by my sharing the truth about it, which is that the only time that happens is when there's police involvement with a mental health emergency that would result in like a 5150 or an involuntary hospitalization. And that even with sharing this information, people are apprehensive. They don't trust it. They don't feel safe that if everyone in the system will act consistent with those rules. And it also goes with the stigma of mental health as well. People are very averse to being stigmatized. And I had a client just the other day who was having some suicidal thoughts. It's not abnormal for her. She happened to mention it on a phone call with her medical provider. She was struggling a bit more. They decided to send out mobile crisis team, which I had worked as a part of the mobile crisis team in the past. And I know that their intention is to avoid any unnecessary hospitalization, to provide an intervention, to help provide support and stabilization so that that person doesn't have to enter into the trauma of an involuntary experience. And even with her trust of me, she had so much anxiety. And I think that this is very common. People are very afraid of their personal choice being usurped and being involuntarily taken away because of their thoughts. And so people are holding back the truth about how they're suffering. And because of the fear of how people will react in the field. And I have to say that I have witnessed a lot of professionals and care managers, case managers, also not have good finesse or good good discernment in handling those situations and really, following the intention of those kind of rules in this area of mental health and safety. So it's real complex, and I think not addressed well, not solved in our system.
Leslie, you brought up a great point. I just want to add in real quick with them being afraid to be honest, is that was one of the main purposes of talking about this as well too, was that if you are honest that you have severe or mental health challenges prior to transplant, now keep in mind these people are facing their own death. If you're honest, you can get rejected for a transplant. And again, I'm so excited for as we continue in this presentation and talking about how we can address trauma and stress upstream so that then in the end, they're not ending up with it, but we can start to address it more upstream. So we shouldn't be denying somebody a transplant because they're afraid that they're going to die. That doesn't seem like it makes sense.
So labeling an illness or disease.
An unwanted label can easily create additional resistance to treatment. It can be a narrow look at a problem. This can be exacerbated by a victim mindset, an imbalance which can cause a provider to have the hero mindset, an unhealthy perpetuation to get survival needs met based on pathologizing and impairment. Monetary gain and disability may create dependence, may encourage dishonesty and further corruption. Over-identification with a diagnosis can backfire through rigid patterns where there is no room for change. And personally, in my experience, I've encountered this over and over as a school teacher in the public health system. There's an incentive and eagerness to label a child. Sometimes there's even a parent may have some sort of social pressure or advantage for getting a label for their child, sometimes even monetarily. So, but looking at the person who gets labeled isn't often looked at. The person who gets labeled is getting tagged with something that's extremely hard to shake off because the people around them, their parents or their family, may accept the label, may reinforce that label in many ways. And So it puts a person in a box psychologically and can make the person feel trapped in many cases. So labeling is something that all practitioners, whether mental or physical physicians, should be very much aware of, because it does have deep psychological effects.
Yes, and we will explore this as time moves on as well, what we mean exactly by this, labeling an illness or disease. And it goes in line with what we're talking about, how patients aren't getting the help that they need, actually, simply by using these labels. So we'll explore that. But people may be ashamed to reach out for help in the very first place, such as counseling. People may be afraid of others with mental health issues. The current paradigm is flawed because it isolates and labels people. We want to move toward a new paradigm where the relationship between mind and body is explored in everyone and not just in people who are labeled mentally ill. Trauma, psychosomatic connections, and epigenetics can play a key role in health. Even medical providers have stigmas. The patient may be open to alternative treatment, but their provider may discourage them from doing so. And we just shared a bunch of observations and experiences of our own that demonstrate that as well.
And I'll just add that there are some diagnoses where there's an incentive for a provider to make, and for financial incentives, if there are certain treatments being used or cutting edge things. And I think, adding on what Scott was saying, that when one identifies with a label or a diagnosis, that then may change their hope, right? Or their level of personal responsibility to make changes, because it may feel permanent. And I think it's very important that we open our healthcare system to this field of epigenetics and understanding the psychosomatic aspects of health and healing, because this brings hope to people from almost, from feeling hopeless that they are stuck for the rest of their lives, on Social Security, and that they fear losing a diagnosis because they could lose their survival, their finances to survive, right? And they don't see the way out, right? And so that holds back the effort in a way to go deeper, to find freedom from those labels. And honestly, the labels in the medical records can really follow and haunt people, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Real quick, I'd just like to add, I think it was in 1986, they came up with what was called labeling theory, which literally is pretty much what you guys are both touching on. And it said that very often with the label, even if the person recovers because of the label, they settle into that self-fulfilling prophecy, and that it's very, very complicated for them to move beyond it. And I can definitely speak on this for just a moment in the world of organ transplantation. I can't tell you, almost every single person I've met will say, before they've even gotten their transplant, they'll say, I want to be an advocate. I want to be an advocate. I want to be an advocate. And then literally what you see happen is it's like they're being pulled back into it for a much deeper psychological healing. And although there is positive that can come out of being an advocate for organ transplantation, what I've witnessed time and time and time again is patients get stuck in this loop of constantly talking about it for the rest of their life and never being able to fully return as a transformed being into their purpose now. They just continue to be an advocate and just talk about it for the rest of their life. It becomes their identity. They merge with it.
And so we have to ask the question, is there one health authority? When we're talking about these subjects, we're opening the conversation, we're asking questions, we're trying to get curious, what are the problems and what are the solutions? And we're not claiming that we know all of it, but we do have some insight into some alternative ideas and different ways to approach the way we're currently doing things. And so many providers must acknowledge that they have insulated expertise in certain aspects of health, but they are not the authority in addressing the whole. People often think they need a health authority, that they need to be dependent on a doctor, therapist, psychiatrist, etc., to fix us. This, we observe, is a great part of the main problem that we are addressing here. Many alternative providers get their clients from referrals. These same providers can be hard to find for individuals, if not because their services are expensive or not covered by insurance. These individuals may also be stigmatized. And if patients empower themselves and pose a challenge to established authority, are providers truly ready to engage with them? We have to really ask ourselves, again, is there one health authority, and are we ready to help put that authority perhaps in the patient or the client?
And are the patients and clients ready for that level of personal responsibility? That's an important question too, because I think a lot of people may not feel ready. They may not know how. Yeah.
It's funny that you say that, Leslie. And again, we'll talk about this more coming up, but I do feel as though we actually are already living in a split system, where there is the traditional model going on of almost like this authority figure and somebody who doesn't want to take full responsibility for their health. And then now you even see physicians getting out of the system and becoming, labeling themselves a physician guide. And they're working, it's almost like a life coach type of relationship where they understand that that model of relationship is the future.
Yes. And yeah, as a health coach myself, I will say a lot of the institutions that are training health coaches are actually developed by doctors who have left the system, or doctors who said, we got to really change the way we're doing things.
Mm.
So there's also the concern of scientism. And scientism is something to be aware of. It's the view that science or its experts and the scientific method are the only valid or reliable means of acquiring knowledge about the world and reality. It holds that science alone can render truth and that scientific explanations are superior to other ways of understanding or interpreting reality, such as through philosophy, religion, or other disciplines. The people who work in today's natural science have been so focused on measuring, examining, and slicing and dicing people and animals open in hopes of finding cures for all sorts of diseases that they forgot about one important thing, according to Rudy Verspoor, dean of the Hahnemann College for, sorry if I pronounce this wrong, this is German, Heilkunst. And he says, quote, we've ended up with a science that is based on death, not on life. Its function isn't to create health, but to manage death. We lost our connection to the inner essence of life. All we could see was the outside. So for this term to even exist, scientism, what does it mean? Why are people using it? I'm all about science. I love, researching and finding out what is true. I mean, we use plenty of statistics in this seminar. But are we perhaps stuck on some of the methods we're using, or even ourselves as being the authority of that information that we're presenting?
I'll add that science is about continual truth discovery. It's not necessarily about arriving to the ultimate answer and this is it, and we're never going to question it. Questioning things and continuing to explore results from different angles and find new hypotheses and theories is really essential for the expansion of our understanding of truth and of what science is really meant to do. And I think what scientism means to me is that experts are saying this is the end all be all. What we think we know is true. And then not staying open to alternative ideas and hypotheses and possibilities. And so people get dogmatic about what they were taught in school or about what is, currently the acceptable philosophy about, what is a virus or et cetera, et cetera. And instead of having that open mind, that says, maybe we don't know it all. Maybe there is a different way of understanding what's happening here.
Mm-hmm. You know what true science requires is curiosity. an exploration, an open mind. And you know what curiosity takes and requires? Energy, time, right? So if you just start to take these things and start to look at them with more nuance and go upstream, as you realize almost the entire way we're operating as a system, it's setting everybody up to fail.
And something I'd like to add about philosophy and science, both are searching for causes, the causes of the problem, or the root causes of issues, or the cause of consciousness. There's something that I've just spontaneously named physical sense bias, and that is that when you look at science, it's easiest to catalog the symptoms, the things that you can see, the results, the end products, rather than the cause. And a lot of times in good science, the idea is to trace those symptoms back to their cause. But again, that takes time, effort, energy, and a lot of creativity, frankly. So a lot of science is heavily biased towards looking at the effects, the symptoms, and failing to evaluate, in some cases, the actual causes.
Scott, I just want to quickly add on what you just said that was so good, is that now more than ever, what we're seeing in a way, in an attempt, I believe, for nature to organically try to balance itself out, what we're seeing more than ever now is psychosomatic conditions and what we call medically unexplained. So now this reduces the ability to do that which you just said.
Right. Exactly.
We even have information later on about Albert Einstein and how, he grew up in his schooling and how he was resistant to many of his professors and many of the academics at the time. And so we may see that also with individuals like Nikola Tesla, who said, hey, we might go equation after equation. We get lost in the sauce, essentially. We don't deal with reality anymore. So this might deal with this idea of scientism, and we'll explore more of this as we move on as well. But there's a really important dynamic to understand here, and that is between the masculine and the feminine when we're talking about these subjects. The feminine is considered open to information. It's to surrender, to let go, to change. And the masculine acts on the information. It's what puts it into effect. And so it would be important to emphasize self-work in the health provider with feminine, loving influence, and an individualized approach with providing a safe space to share personal experience. Right? We want a balance of the masculine and feminine. The patient is the receiver of care. The provider is the giver of care. Both need responsibility. Together in a holistic relationship, they can change the system. While there should be a healthy integration, often outside forces act to interfere with a unified connection, which would make it a healthy relationship. With holistic assessment, practitioners may reach out to other practitioners or become more flexible, honest, and open with their approach. This can be healing for both provider and patient.
Corey, I'd like to quickly add, this is one of the genesis of my Awakening Healthcare project, was I felt as though the feminine was dying within the current medical model. And I don't mean a woman, but I mean the feminine principle of care, which that's what the feminine represents, is the reception and the ability for personal transformation. So just to reduce this, you can look at the current Western medical model as the masculine is about naming. Just like Adam named the animals from the ark, they name the condition. They look at the information, name it, and do what they can to try to solve it. But if you don't look at really value the subjective as married to the objective experience of the patients and allow them to transform amongst their disease process, there's no room for healing to occur. And then we keep people contained in that label, in that diagnosis, in the model as a recurring client of care. So the feminine is what allows the outlier perspective for the transformation to take place. So that's what I hope we can, again, start to bring more into our future model, and for every patient and provider to start to just use that very simple framework, even within their own life. Right? Very easy. Am I being or am I doing? Am I acting or am I surrendering? Life is about a balance, right? That's the principle of the Tao, right? Is how do I find balance? Healthcare providers are very action oriented, which they need to be, but in their personal life, are they balancing out all of that doing with states of being and surrendering to nature and working on their own transformation process?
Yes. And to emphasize what you mentioned about the Tao, that's an ancient Chinese philosophy, right? So again, philosophy, science, religion, we have all these different fields, and maybe you're listening out there and you never heard of the masculine and the feminine or scientism. Well, in our hopes, we're trying to share these new ideas with some of you. Maybe you are already familiar with it. That's okay too. We're going to be, sharing the holistic picture of what we see can make that holistic diagnosis. Here are some charts detailing the masculine and the feminine to make it a little bit easier to understand. There's plenty of these online that you can find. You have the left brain being that linear, analytical, realistic, control, practical side. And then you have this right brain side. You notice there's a lot of color going on, right? You got art, poetry, yearning, sensuality, taste, passion, care, Stephanie mentioned. And so maybe these charts just make it a little bit easier to understand perhaps the differences between the two. But again, we want these to be balanced, unified, harmonized.
Yeah, I'd like to highlight a little bit on the feminine side, which is generally left out of the scientific and medical health process. And that is the feminine side, which also can correlate to our right brain functions. And what we're aiming for is right and left hemisphere balance, as Corey's describing. But this ability to sort of deep dive into self-understanding and self-reflection. It's that psychological knowing is a feminine process. It's about also looking at systems and inner relationships, interconnections, using intuition and creative expression. And it comes back to this idea of the relationship between the provider and the patient, because communication is a relational process. Relational dynamics are a feminine dynamic. So the listening, right? The heart-based listening, the heart opening, the care, this is part of the feminine, the process orientation, not just the answer, right? But the process between the two individuals who are trying to solve a problem. That has largely been underplayed, under-prioritized in the system.
And if you can see right now where we stand is that we're in crisis in many systems in our environment. And what's happening at large is that this antiquated, and I'm speaking in reductions and generalizations, but this antiquated patriarchal masculine energy is not allowing the perspective of his counterpart in to provide the holistic purview of what can be done to integrate. Because often when that feminine comes in, the masculine ego can feel triggered that I'm no longer you're challenging my identity and my purpose, when in reality, she just wants a relationship and to be collaborative, to work towards his skill and her skill uniting under the same system, which would really open us up to healing and transformation, not just treatment and drugs and surgery.
And she doesn't only exist within women. The she we're talking about, the feminine, exists within all people. So yes. Men who may have a harder time accessing these feminine qualities also need the environment to guide or promote or coax out this expression. And this process. It's still a need, a human need.
I could go on with this slide for a long time. I think you're right, Leslie. It's important to highlight here that we're not talking about just an externalized man and a woman, that actually this is energy and these principles are within each and every one of us. So you see a whole brain here, right? That's encompassing both of these sides. So a very basic thing you could do is to just look at these words here and really just get an understanding of where am I predominant. I could be a woman and very predominant in my masculine energy, or I could be a man and more predominant in my feminine. And there's nothing wrong with that. But the goal and the calling of our time is to be able to honor and create a relationship with these two sides of you. So number one, you're not at war with your own self and projecting that outwardly onto other people and society. And then once you can start to work within these energies within yourself, then we start really pushing the needle and changing dynamics when we coalesce and work with other people who are in this more balanced mindset. That's when things really start to shift.
Very slight detail, maybe a little tangent, is just looking at the script, the left brain, how it is written, the font it's written with, and then the right brain is in a cursive. And I just want to point out how cursive is sort of a dying art, and it does reflect the feminine. It reflects the right brain aspect of expression. And so and when you look at tablets and texting and online, all this communication is being done with more of the left brain, action. And I think it just again reflects this weakening of the expression of the feminine and the importance of it, what's missing.
Yes.
I think
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say, especially with like artificial intelligence now producing art for people, people are not necessarily creating art out of their own passions and their own heart, as much as they did, let's say, a couple hundred years ago, 1,000 years ago. They built all sorts of amazing structures and architecture. Perhaps that's reflective of our mentalities.
Art is a therapy. As Scott mentioned, writing.
Yes, we'll get into that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not ashamed to claim this boldly and powerfully and unapologetically right now. The feminine is under attack in every system. You can see it in sports and people taking over. The feminine energy is under attack because it's misunderstood. It's misunderstood, and it causes threats to reality as we know it, because the ego has to be deconstructed and reorganized for a new way. So I am just here to unapologetically say that the sacred feminine, not the maladaptive feminine, not the manipulative feminine, not the hypersexualized feminine. These are all expressions coming from wounding. I'm talking about this sacred feminine energy who loves her counterpart as much as he loves her. This is under attack, and we need to do everything we can within ourselves to reconnect ourselves back to our holistic expression.
Wow. You could even see on the left side of this chart, I am a scientist, and then on the right brain, it's I am creativity. So going back to the idea of scientism, what we talked about, ask yourself, where does that fit in on this chart? Right? So you can start connecting the dots here, but we'll help you. We have to ask ourselves the big question after reflecting on this, again, our observations, our experiences, and we're going to delve more into statistics and how other people have dealt with this. I mean, these are not new phenomena. What we're talking about is not, something that only we are talking about. There's people who have talked about it for many years, but we see it's not being addressed. We have to ask ourselves the question, can we create a system where it's safe to be honest? As simple as that is, be honest, right? Can we do that? Are we safe in order to do that? Can we trust ourselves in order to do that?
And I'll ask how, because I know that it's possible. So what is the path to creating a system where it's safe to be honest?
Yeah. One thing when I used to teach yoga that I used to say, and it applies here and it's simple. Truth is always can be very simply spoken, is we would say, when you are authentic, it gives other people permission to do the same. So if we want our patients to be authentic, the providers need to start being on. Everybody has to actually start being honest, which then may not be in alignment with the identity or projection we're showing in the world. So this is scary because a lot of us are living upon mountains of lies. And we need to be willing to deconstruct the lies. I think that's where we're at. We're in a deconstruction, ego degradation phase. And we need to be willing to go as deep as possible with cleaning our own selves out to help encourage other people that it's safe to do the same. But we can't just in a healthcare system say, well, yes, we want to do all that we can to be more, to create the space for our patients to be honest, and not realize your own part in that.
Yeah. Even when it came to the labeling, right? Am I that label or that identity that I wear, or am I much more than that? And can my patient or client, do they have to call themselves a diabetic? Are they stuck with that their entire life and that becomes their identity? Or can we imagine any possible reality where they are much more than that and perhaps without labels because they are, unique? They're their own being, right? Do we recognize that individuality that gives them that art, that creative right brain aspect that we're talking about?
Hey, Corey, really quick, just a little nuance is that we're not talking about make up a completely falsified story about your illness and that you're disassociating from the reality of what it is, or you're somebody who identifies as a cat and you don't actually, like, we're not talking about that. We're talking about truly just shifting the narrative and the wording so that we're not getting attached with these heavy burdens of labels. When I was experiencing my autoimmune disease, right? Every time I'd go to the office, you have autoimmune disease, you have autoimmune disease. I would say to myself in my own mind, I'm experiencing autoimmune disease. This is an experience I'm having. I'm not it. And I had to keep reconditioning myself because they just wanted that label to be so concretized down to the bone. And I just kept reminding myself, this is an experience I'm having. I'm not that.
There's a profound interrelationship between our thoughts and our experience, and the labels, that the self-talk that we give ourselves, and the way that is expressed in our symptoms. This field of mind-body connection is vital to really understand and incorporate into the healthcare field, to be able to really get to root causes and deep solutions.
Right.
Agreed.
And besides that, a lot of the healing that takes place in talk therapy, it comes from the honesty level and trust level between the therapist and the person, and also the person looking into themselves and being more honest with themselves can create a healing environment and can lead the person back to healing.
Doing the self-work, both for patients and providers, and everyone really, to do this inner work.
Yeah. I just have a quick statement is I used to see patients with providers as a peer mentor. I would be in an appointment if the patient allowed me to be, as a peer mentor to see how that would navigate. And it was awesome. But basically, I would get the same phrase from the provider each time, is they would say to me, that person told you more in 15 minutes than I was able to get out of them for a year. And I said, it's because I don't wear the white coat and I'm not judging them and I'm just meeting them exactly where they are. And I'm just a peer. I'm not coming with any authority. They feel safe to be honest.
Wow. And yeah, we have to ask ourselves, are we having a healthcare model that is promoting that safety to be honest? Well, healthcare has become quite politicized in our view, and it's become a business model. Why really do practitioners go into medicine? We can ask. Well, due to the variety of factors we are detailing in our healthcare system, true honesty between doctor and patient is not promoted or allowed. For example, we have the rigid scope of practice, the definitions, the liability, licensing, fear of reputation, shame, lack of internal work, the Ash conformity I mentioned before, exclusion of non-materialist perspectives or non-spiritual perspectives, making the system one-dimensional. These are some of the observations we have upon why this system we have is not built upon honesty.
Yeah, Corey, you're bringing up this disconnect between mind, body, and spirit that is promoted and yet is impossible to do. So if we're trying to just focus on the body, and not address the spirit or the mind, we are not addressing the whole person, and we're not addressing the real root causes of problems nor the solution.
In the theories of alternative medicine, the physical is the last manifestation of the disease. So think about all of the upstream avenues that we've missed, that, who knows if that illness would have manifested if we would have addressed things earlier on. But I mean, it's the mind, it's the endocrine system, the cascade to the psycho, neuro, immunologic, and the physical being the last expression. So how possibly can we throw an organ into somebody and fix the tissue or the organ and presume that that person is now healed?
Yes. Well, what does health mean? This is important, right? We're talking about health. We're revealing the different aspects of the healthcare system. If we're looking at simply the word health from Old English and Proto-Germanic, it actually means whole. So we should look at the whole of all the parts and the layers, everything that we're saying here, and the nuances, right? We want to consider all of it. The heart, lungs, brain, mind, body, legs, nerves, mouth, etc. Every part you can name. Humans are connected to the environment, to each other, etc. So therefore, the relationships with institutions, organizations, and practices are all important to look into. We can ask ourselves more questions here. Why doesn't Western medicine value what Eastern medicine values? Why do we distinguish these two as separate from one another? Just like, the left brain, the right brain, right? Why? Alternative medicine, mainstream medicine. Do you want to feel better temporarily, or do you want to heal short term or long term? Why might we think we have all the answers? Is our treatment human or humane? Does your insurance company care about you? Do all the people in your life really care about you? And of course, I can let these questions sink in because these are reflections, right? If we're going to use more of that right brain feminine aspect of ourselves that perhaps we're saying is missing in the healthcare field, and you are in the healthcare field, then it may help to sit and reflect upon these questions.
And I'll add another variation of this last question by saying, what is the impact on you and your health if you do not feel cared about? I would say it's profound.
You'll seek it out however you can get it, whether you have to be a victim or martyr yourself or be manipulative. Your body will seek out that care, and it's better, like you said, to provide the healthy structure from the start than have to use all of these other means, like spending a life being ill to get the care that you really needed.
And not that it's intentional. There's an unconscious process here.
Right, absolutely.
Is reflective of how our system, our human technology is built, that doesn't separate our thoughts from the response of the nervous system and the endocrine system into creating conditions in the physical body. Okay.
Yeah. So what would it look like then, if we assessed health from a holistic point of view? Within integrative nutrition, a model known as the circle of life demonstrates this. And again, I'm an integrative nutrition health coach, so I'm biased here sharing this model. It's from one of my practices. And so you can see, we're covering joy, spirituality, creativity, finances, all these different categories. And we actually have our clients map out using this chart how they feel in their life about each category. How fulfilled are they? And the more it makes a circle, the more whole it is. And they put like a little marker where they feel, basically like 1 to 10, how good or how bad. And so the more holistic it's seen to be had, the better. And if there's parts that are lacking, is there maybe any correlation between the parts that are lacking? What's going on, right? We have to ask ourselves those questions. It's very personalized, very individualized. So there's a problem of separation, if we haven't made that clear by now. People are separated from their own inner wisdom, from each other, and from information, which may contain helpful solutions. This can perpetrate illness of all kinds. Who really is the healthcare system? And this brings us to the topic, the main focus of this seminar. The problem is addressed in our seemingly diagnosis, quote unquote, of statism, right? Statism, this idea that we're going to dissect through the course of this seminar, we believe can answer a lot of the questions that we have proposed here. So moving forward with our hypothesis in this presentation, it would be important to not be too closed-minded or open-minded. We are postulating that there is a mentality that many of us partake in without comprehension or diagnosis. We hypothesize a bold claim that it is the main causal factor to the top cause of unnatural death. So not only related to medical and society, but it's overall the main causal factor to the top cause of unnatural death. And that may seem like a bold claim because it is, and we intend to explain what we mean by that. You can see a picture of a learning bell curve, and it helps to be in the center between teacher and student, the best position to learn, where you're not too masculine or feminine imbalanced. You're not too arrogant, you're not too naive. You are right there in the middle, where you're not too trusting, not too skeptical. You are able to discern. And we want to help that ability in you. And we would encourage that ability in you. Ask questions upon us and the information we present. I would say I welcome it. Because if it isn't for that, I would be, that scientism, left brain, masculine imbalance that I claim to speak against. So I don't want to be in that position. I don't claim to be the authority. I claim to share knowledge that I think can help your practice, just as it helps many of the individuals here on this seminar.
And just to clarify on this slide, when you say we hypothesize a bold claim that it is the main causal factor, we're talking about statism itself being the causal factor, the main causal factor, and the top cause of unnatural death, right?
Thank you very much for joining us for our introduction to Health Revealed. I appreciate you being here with us. And if you want to access the slides, you can go to healthrevealed.org. But join us for part 1, where we dive deep into what is statism. And we share a lot of statistics and examples and how we can get out of the current systems that are basically oppressing us one way or another, whether it's ourselves, our patients, or these third parties, this triad that we're speaking of. There's a lot of components to this, so we're going to break it down, and we welcome you to join us in this whole journey. Thank you very much for watching.